to see the movie, but from this standpoint, you know what shocked me? A couple of things. First, I think that in my basic description I was right. That is to say that the role of that prattling friend is really that of a, I mean, there is a certain scene which surprisingly does not take place only in melodramas but also in real life. Like, I even remember sometimes being desperate and you just somehow want to fall down. Maybe not exactly to kill yourself, but just, to disappear, to fall. And then some totally stupid thing, a friend bothering you, something that you experience as a total nuisance, nonetheless is a stupid obstacle preventing you from falling down. And because later, after the guy leaves, the would-be lover, the two ladies, Celia Johnson, the loved one, and the prattling friend found themselves together in a train carriage, and then there the structure is even clearer. This structure is, oh, why doesn't she shut up? The other one, she goes on talking. But I made 2 or even 3 alternate scenarios of the film. And I hope you will agree that I think this is a productive strategy, because if you make just this small mental experiment, what if this were to happen? What if that? A little bit differently in the story, then you see the necessity of the story. For example, what if, when later in the train or at any point, what if the prattling friend who talks all the time were to stop talking? I think it would have been a horrifying silence. And I think that if the movie were to be psychologically consistent, at that point, Celia Johnson would be obliged to tell her, please go on talking, to revert, like she needs that. Second thing that I imagine, this would be a Roald Dahl version. What if, when they are separating, while they are separating in such a pathetic way, through some small slip, I don't know, some small piece of paper or whatever falls out of Trevor Howard's jacket. It doesn't matter how, but, or she, the heroine, would discover, or we were to discover that he is not married at all. That all this idea, I also have a wife with 2 children and so on, it's just his fake, his pretense to give a more dramatic, romantic, tragic flavor to an otherwise vulgar, common love affair. The third version that I would almost prefer is although now I will be evil, in contrast to my friend, I'm now denouncing my friend, in contrast to my friend Alain Badiou, who loved the movie, don't ask me why, I hate it, Bridges of the Madison County. I know what I'm saying. I would like the Bridges of the Madison County twist. Wouldn't it be nice if at the end, the husband, Fred, if we were to discover that he knew all of it all the time, but was just out of love, not to hurt her, was pretending that he doesn't know it. This would be then the truly awkward situation. Like, for her all of a sudden to discover the guy knows everything. Because, where the structure is even nicer. Both of them, the babbling, prattling friend and the husband, are, I claim, 2 aspects of the same person. In her crucial monologue, the heroine, I even didn't know that, noticed it only yesterday evening, that the entire inner monologue, narration, flashback, is addressed at her husband. And the whole structure is, you are the only one I can address, but, that's supposed to be then the tragic split, but precisely you are the one to whom I cannot confess. And the ordinary, common friend, the lady who talks all the time, the heroine, would like to confess to her, but she's simply not appropriate. So it's simply a split in the addressee to whom one should confess. So I really think that in the underlying symbolic economy of the film, it's like, you remember when from Vertigo I showed you that moment of erotic tension after Scotty drags Madeleine out of the San Francisco Bay, where precisely when the contact is established, the phone rings, the husband. I think that in the same sense, this prattling, babbling lady is the husband stand-in. maybe this is one of the ways to grasp that Lacan's statement, woman is one of the names of the father. You know, woman is the prattling lady, that's the paternal authority embodied. Why did this movie, now I will tell you almost, and then I will stop with this actor studio personal confession remote, but nonetheless, almost a personal confession, because I remember when I was young, I found myself often in the same situation, which was extremely humiliating for me. My father, a very patriarchal person, which is why it wasn't in a very classical Freudian way, when I learned some 5 years ago that my father died, I was glad. I didn't have any problems or whatever. But I remember my father returning from his job at around 4 in the afternoon, and when I was like 10 years old, and he sat down and said, "Oh, I'm tired, come here to me. Why don't you just babble, talk something? It doesn't matter what, just..." And I felt it so humiliating. No, even if you mean it, you don't say it so openly. Basically, he told me openly, it doesn't matter what, just go on talking something. And I think that this would have been the truth of that situation. It's not that the lady friend is interrupting. Maybe the true film would have been for Celia Johnson to say to her friend, "Listen, please just go on talking something, it doesn't matter what," and so on and so on. But okay, we are not dealing with this today, enough with this. So let's go on. I'm really sad that we did not have time to enter more at the very end, you remember, into that short Buddhism debate. Maybe we should really do it at the very end. So I will just now, in literally 1-2 minutes, try to recapitulate something that I already said, and which for me is the problem of Buddhism. It's a very simple one. Don't go too fast to the end, nirvana, enlightenment, and so on. Nonetheless, that's where for me problems begin. The entire edifice, grounded in a certain, apparently very common presupposition, which is repeated all the time with all of them, from the big original figure Buddha to Dalai Lama today, that all sentient beings are striving for happiness. They want to avoid pain. And that's then the presupposition. That's the idea. Well, if there is a lesson of psychoanalysis, it's that this is not true, at least for humans. That it's definitely, pathetically, if you want, not true that all sentient beings are striving for happiness or to avoid pain. That's the whole point of death drive, of compulsion to repeat, and so on and so on. Already here is the gap. In this apparently neutral but very basic, the most elementary presupposition. Another problem that I have, and I'm here very open, when I say another problem that I have, it's not a polite way to say I have a solution, but I play open spirit with you. I really think it's a problem, maybe I even misunderstand something, is that I often see Buddhist texts, for which I have a great respect, oscillating between the two extremes. On the one hand, I'm very well aware of the fundamental gap between the Buddhist, authentic Buddhist approach and Western mysticism. In Western mysticism, the idea is that through ecstasis, whatever you, at least in the standard versions of Christian mysticism, you, how should I put it naively, you really try to move out of this world into another reality. While as true Buddhists always emphasize, nirvana does not mean you go into some kind of transmigration of the soul. Everything is here exactly the way it is. So I'm well aware that when I said that for Buddhism, after enlightenment, the wheel stops to turn, it doesn't mean that in your reality you no longer have desires, fears, and so on. What changes is just how you relate to all this. But nonetheless, what is the nonetheless? The nonetheless is here that, how should I put it, nonetheless, at the same time, you find descriptions which at least sound as that the ultimate goal of Buddhist enlightenment is even to redeem all the sentient beings of their suffering and so on and so on. Like, you know what I mean? I see in Buddhism inscribed this oscillation between, on the one hand, nothing really has to change. Not even less suffering if we understand by suffering what is happening in reality, people dying of pain and so on. All that has to change is your attitude. You have to change so that the suffering no longer works the way it works in a fully engaging way for you. But this is always redoubled by a much more radical in the superficial sense rather, almost I would say cosmic prospect of effectively, how should I put it, stopping, cancelling the very life circulation, of bringing all the universe even to a standstill, if you want. I see this as a kind of a tension. Okay, but here things are more precise. Probably, I guess we should go at it later. Now, before, and today you will get Hegel. Before going to Hegel directly, I would like nonetheless I cannot sustain from indulging in what I consider a small, nice speculation about how Lacan refers to sciences. I know I was already mentioning here 2-3 times the Higgs field and so on. Now, from a little bit of a different approach. Namely, first, and this traumatizes me a little bit because in the polemic, very violent polemic, which will now explode in the next issue of Critical Inquirer, my ex-friend, Ernesto Laclau, is attacking me ferociously, where I learn I understand nothing. I don't understand Lacan, I don't understand Hegel, I don't understand him, I don't understand Marx. Among other things, and this shocked me a little bit because I always thought that if my name is associated with something, it's the Lacanian real, no? Now I learned there that, quote from Laclau, Žižek obviously doesn't understand the ABC of what the Lacanian real is, no? That's nice to learn. Why? The topic is, and this is incredibly how all the people are annoyed by this. When I emphasize again and again that from a Lacanian perspective, capitalism, the logic of the capital is real. And I don't know why. There must be something in it because I noticed that with all my friends, they go defensive, even in very strange mood, like in the sense of, but here I contradict myself, but don't I see capitalism cannot be real, and so on and so on. But I think it is real. And what do I mean by real? You know that in Alain Badiou's recent work, and I like very much his development in his last book, The Logic of the Worlds, I think he is definitely on the correct track. He noticed that, if you know a little bit about Badiou's ontology, that the mere duality of being, the totally stupid flat, multitude is negri term, let's say multiplicity of being, that we cannot, as it were, pass directly from it to event. Something is missing in between, which is the notion of the world. The world, I claim, is precisely, let's call it, the world in the symbolic sense, the horizon of meaning, if you want. This is in between, because events do not happen directly in reality. Events shatter always a certain world. Events are events within a certain world, because the entire structure of presence, representation, totalization, and so on, within which an event intervenes, shattering it is the structure of a world. And what Badiou, some of you, if you follow his work, must know it, because I know that he was making this point often in his London appearances even, likes to emphasize is that what is really new about capitalist, civilization, or whatever, is that precisely it is the first worldless civilization. It's no longer a world. And I just am tempted to take him seriously here. I don't think that this debate about is capitalism Eurocentric or whatever is really relevant. Of course, empirically, it originated in Europe. But I think this is a contingent fact which has no deeper significance. What is important is that let's call it the elementary logic of the capital, this profit-making, whatever, machinery of surplus value, is a kind of a formal matrix which remains the same, can be operative in all possible worlds. By worlds, I mean symbolic universes. You can have Buddhist capitalism, Catholic capitalism, Japanese capitalism, Indian capitalism, Latino American capitalism. It's that which precisely remains the same in all possible symbolic universes. And that's what I think is so shattering about capitalism, that it's in a way a worldless civilization, which is why the typical defense is then to how the problems that even the problem that we even at the everyday level experience is how to secure our particular roots or particular way of life, which precisely means our world against capitalism. And this, what remains the same in all possible universes and so on, is, I claim, precisely the real. In this sense, it should be always kept in mind that capitalism is real. Real precisely in the sense that it's just some kind of a neutral, formal frame which reproduces itself. It's kind of a social virus, if you want, in all possible universes, and which has no deeper meaning in the sense that the problem is precisely how to safeguard meaning. My God, isn't this the problem with capitalism from the very beginning? If you look at the first conservative reactions from Edmund Burke, whatever you want, and so on, they all detected from the very beginning a certain meaninglessness in capitalism. Meaninglessness in the sense of undermining any organic, meaningful social structure and so on. And isn't then the problem of all great conservatives, from, let's call them gentle conservatives, de Gaulle in France, up to fascists, how to unite capitalism with meaning. Meaning, of course, as a social meaning. Precisely because, again, capitalism in this sense works as the real. Okay, but let me go on. So, when Lacan deals with the notion of the real, in this short book that was recently published of his two talks to different groups of Catholics, Lacan addressing the Catholics, it's a small booklet recently published in France, not yet translated into English. Lacan makes a very nice point of how the two reals to be opposed today are the scientific real and the psychoanalytic real, and that this gap defines us today. That is to say that what psychoanalysis deals with is not the scientific real, but the real of drive, a different, traumatic, and so on, real. But nonetheless, what is so interesting is that although Lacan opposes these two reals, he often resorts to the scientific real and evokes examples from hard sciences in order to clarify the deadlocks, the problems of the psychoanalytic real. The question here is, are these references meant to be only metaphors, didactic borrowings with no inherent cognitive value, or do they involve a theoretical link, bridge between the two domains? Although Lacan tends to downplay these borrowings, reducing them to didactic tools, the case is often more ambiguous. Let me take Lacan's characterization of hard sciences as dealing with what he calls savoir dans le réel, knowledge in the real. It is as if there is a knowledge of the laws of nature directly inscribed into the real of natural objects and processes. For instance, a stone somehow knows what laws of gravity to obey when it is falling. Now, it may seem that Lacan is simply confusing things here. You would say the stone doesn't know. It's simply part of its immediate objective existence. It's only in human history that laws are norms which can be forgotten or otherwise disobeyed. Let me evoke an old example of mine, which I use in many of my books, the archetypal scene from cartoons, which relies for its comical effect precisely on the confusion of these two levels. Like a cat walks across above the precipice, it continues to float in the air, it falls only after it looks down and becomes aware of how it has no support beneath its feet. As if it has momentarily forgotten the natural laws its body has to obey and has to be reminded of them. Like, don't you see? What about natural laws? Oh yes, now I remember them. I fall down. However, okay, the first thing to say here is that to pass from cartoons comedy to tragedy, isn't it that when a political regime disintegrates in historical reality, that we can, along similar lines, distinguish between its two deaths, symbolic and real death? Like, there are those strange epochs when a regime, for a limited period, persists in power, although its time is clearly over. It is as if it goes on living because it doesn't notice that it is already dead. This happens always, that it's really like as if it goes on and it has to be too reminded. Like at some point, as Hegel puts it nicely, all you have to do to those in power is like treat them like a cat above the precipice. No, look down. Don't you know your time is over? No, but there are even more mysterious moments, and I remember them from my political youth, where they hold those in power onto their power. It goes on, although somehow they all know that the game is over. I think these are very interesting phenomena. Like in one of my early books, I really advise you to read it if you want to get the political dynamic, that wonderful book by Richard Kapuscinski, the Polish, the Shah of Shahs, about Iran, where he claims, of course it's a mythical reconstruction, but I think the logic is right. He was there and wanted to isolate the precise moment when it was over. I mean, the rule of Shah. And his result was that it wasn't over when Shah effectively fled or whatever. His idea is that it happened around, if I remember it correctly, half a year earlier, and he claimed, even if it's not true, again, as Italians say, it's non è vero, è ben trovato, that a certain event happened on one of the main squares, whatever, of Tehran, where a crowd was gathering for demonstrations, and policemen approached them, not a large crowd, and started to shout at them, disperse, disperse, go. And one of the guys, not even a great hero, it's not even according to Kapuscinski, known who he is, simply, these miracles happen. Maybe he simply made a good judgment of the situation. Maybe he saw that the policeman is not so sure of himself. He stood up and said, no, we will not go, you go. And policeman looked perplexed for a couple of seconds and turned around and left. Then, in a mysterious way, you know how these rumors function, no? Did you notice how, even if, of course, now I'm not preaching mysticism, it can usually, my God, now I talk like I'm superstitious, be explained rationally, but did you notice how there is something so mysterious in rumors that there are things that happen and then all of a sudden everybody knows it, no? Like it happens to me, oh my God, it's such an embarrassing episode, but okay, I was young, 30 years ago in the army. It was a large military barracks. On the one hand, I was there talking only with two soldiers. We were talking what soldiers are usually talking about, sexual practices and so on, no? And then these were third pro-macho soldiers and said, how decadent in the West, men even do cunnilingus, a true man never, it smells, they never do that. And then I made my fatal mistake. I said, what's so bad if you are washed? I did it, no? They looked at me, and then something mysterious happened. An officer came and told me, take this message, run fast to the other side of the military barracks. We were alone there were no phones there. I ran there to deliver a message to another officer. I entered how the officer addressed me. Are you the guy who is licking cunts? Aren't you ashamed? I don't get it. Somehow, then, as you can imagine, I was called whatever names, then my destiny was sealed there. But what I want to say is that in the same way in Tehran, in this mystical way, all of a sudden the rumor spread that happened, that event. And it worked like this pure. Everybody somehow knew from that point on that it's over for the Shah. It went on for half a year. There were still street battles. People were dying. But you know what I mean? In an imperceptible way, the whole atmosphere changed. From that point on, it was over. I always love these symbolic moments. How, again, you can have the gap in both directions. Either you have a power which, like, I wonder, but I don't think so, they are too arrogant. Is this happening now to the labor in power? Yeah, maybe this, but again we are here at this logic that I mentioned apropos of this will have been. I claim that in the same way you remember when I gave you that nice French quote, which was, if Balladur will win the elections, it will have been a necessary victory, retroactively. So I claim that, yes, if labor will fall apart or whatever, lose a year from now or half a year, whenever, it will have been that the Prescott was maybe Prescott and cricket will be your Tehran crossing or whatever. You know what I mean? This element, which it's a purely symbolic element. Ultimately, it even doesn't matter if it's true or not. Not that I have great sympathies for Prescott or New Labour, but wait a minute. I agreed with a commentary that I read. I never got it. Okay, he was playing cricket. Okay, apart from the obvious fact that cricket is a game where it's total mystique to me. A guy throws a ball, then some other guys start to run. I don't. But apart from that, I mean, I read even a comment where they said, imagine this to happening to a different old conservative politician. I mean, it's absolutely irrational, I claim, what happened. But nonetheless, okay, this will maybe fun. What I'm saying is that it can work in both ways. Either a certain power structure still persists, goes on, but everybody knows, including themselves, that they are already dead. And the same thing obviously took place in Soviet Union sometime during Gorbachev era. Or, even more interesting, the other way around. They don't know that they are dead, and how should I put it, the knowledge comes too late. They have to be reminded. Like here you have Hegel's famous commentary on Napoleon, that Napoleon's problem was that when he lost the first time, he didn't know that he is dead. So he had to be defeated the second time, just to be reminded that he is dead. No? So, okay, now comes my point. You will say, but of course, this gap is the typical gap that pertains to the symbolic order, a gap between the brutal, stupid reality and its symbolic registration, however you call it. But it doesn't happen in brute physical reality. There, things simply are what they are. But here, again, to give you a simple example, isn't it that at its most daring, quantum physics does allow for such a paradox of cartoon, of the momentarily suspension, forgetting of the knowledge in the real. Imagine that you have to take a flight on a certain day to pick up a fortune the next day, but you do not have the money to buy the ticket. But then you discover that the accounting system of the airline is such that if you wire the ticket payment within 24 hours of arrival at your destination, no one will ever know it was not paid prior to departure. So you can temporarily cheat a little bit. Now, in a homologous way, I'm here quoting, I'm sorry, that's the limit of my scientific horizon, Brian Greene, The Elegant Universe. In a homologous way, the energy a particle has can wildly fluctuate so long as this fluctuation is over a short enough time scale. So just as the accounting system of the airline allows you to borrow the money for a plane ticket, provided you pay it back quickly enough, quantum mechanics allows a particle to borrow energy so long it can relinquish it within a time frame determined by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. But quantum mechanics forces us to take the analogy one important step further. Imagine someone who is a compulsive borrower and goes from friend to friend asking for money. Borrow and return, over and over again with unflagging intensity. He takes in money only to give it back in short order. A similar frantic shifting back and forth of energy and momentum is occurring perpetually in the universe of microscopic distance and time intervals. End of quote. So this is how, even in an empty region of space, a particle emerges out of nothing, borrowing its energy from the future and paying for it with its annihilation before the system notices this borrowing. So the whole network can function like this, in a rhythm of borrowing and annihilation, one borrowing from the other, displacing the debt onto the other. Now, what this presupposes is a minimal gap between things in their immediate brute reality and the registration of this reality in some medium. One can cheat insofar as the second is in a delay with regard to the first. So again, I think that what is for me so fascinating for quantum physics is that this minimal delay, this logic that every one of us has, let's say you are on a diet. And let's say you have a severe person, a mother, a spouse who controls you. No? But who, if you had this problem, who didn't have this? It's not simply cheating. You really think that it works, that somehow if I quickly, secretly ate something, and if the other who controls me doesn't notice it, somehow it doesn't count. You really believe that it doesn't count. What counts is, but okay, again, you will say this is symbolic cheating. What about reality? The mystique, again, is that, okay, mystique, precisely not mystique, but the miracle of quantum physics is that as if you can cheat in this way in reality itself. So it is as if, again, the gap which may appear specifically symbolic, cultural, the gap between what a thing is in its stupid, immediate reality and its registration, that this gap is inscribed into reality itself. Which is why all these problems, which I think are wonderful problems and insolvable in its own domain of quantum physics, when they say the wave oscillation collapses with registration. But then there are debates, okay, but what counts as the moment of registration? It is when the machine makes the measure, it is when a person, is it? So, and it's incredible how you have all possible versions up to the purely linguistic ones. One of those, what's his name, the popularizer, John Cribin or what? His claim is even that it's only when it's put in language that the registration, that is to say, the collapse of the wave function effectively occurs. Again, it is as if part of what we perceived usually as specific to human reality, this gap between the raw real and its registration, somehow has to be at work already in, let's call it, natural reality. Now, my second example, the big counterpoint to quantum physics, Einstein's theory of relativity. There I claim we also find an unexpected parallel with the Lacanian theory. As you know, the starting point of the theory of relativity is the strange fact that for every observer, no matter in what direction and how fast he moves, light moves at the same speed. And I claim in an analogous way for Lacan, no matter if the desiring subject approaches or runs from his object of desire, this object seems to remain at the same distance from him. We all remember the nightmarish situation from a dream. The more I run away, the more I remain at the same place. And I think that this paradox can be neatly resolved through the difference between the object and the cause of desire. No matter how close I get to the object of desire, its cause remains at a distance elusive. Furthermore, as you know, the general theory of relativity resolves the antinomy between the relativity of every movement with regard to observer and the absolute velocity of light, which moves at a constant speed independently of the point of observation, with the notion of curved space. Again, I claim that in a homologous way, the Freudian solution to the antinomy between the subject's approaching or running away from his objects of desire and the constant speed and distance from him of the object of desire resides in the curved space of desire. Sometimes the shortest way to realize a desire is to bypass its object, to circulate around it, to postpone its encounter. And I think this would be the most elementary definition of what Lacan means by object small a, the object cause of desire. The agent of this curving, that acts on account of which, when we confront the object of desire, more satisfaction is provided by dancing around it than by directly going at it. That's the object small a. Again, let me make this point. I want to be clear here. The object A for Lacan is not what you desire, is that which makes you desire what you desire. It's not, let's say, a woman or a man I love. It's that which, and I'm usually not even aware of what this is, that which makes me love that woman. As I developed in my totalitarianism book, in this way, you can turn around in a wonderful way the usual way people approach the problem of melancholy. No? Usually, melancholy is celebrated, even by some gay theorists, as somehow more authentic than mourning. The idea is you have a traumatic attachment to an object. Through mourning, you let it go gradually, through the work of mourning, while a melancholic remains faithful to it. But already Agamben pointed out how, if you read Freud closely, you find a definition of melancholy which is exactly the opposite one. The problem with melancholic is not that you cannot get over the loss of the object of desire. It is rather that you treat an object as lost even before you actually lose it. It's still here, but it's already lost, because you no longer desire it. That is to say, I think that what is the proper moment of melancholy is when you get the object, but at that very point, the object cause of desire, what made you desire the object, disappear. Which is why the typical situation of melancholic is not poor people who don't get it. It's rich people who get everything but nonetheless no longer desire it. No, it's the opposite. It's the opposite structure. Okay, so even more generally, but let's stop it here, one can develop that in the same way that if we have this duality between quantum physics and relativity theory, do we not have the same duality in psychoanalysis, I claim, between, let's call it the hermeneutical aspect of Freud, hermeneutics of the unconscious, interpretation of dreams, slips of tongues, and so on. Like, here we think of Freud's interpretation of dreams, psychopathology of everyday life, and so on. And on the other side, a more positivist study of our psychic apparatus as a machine for dealing with libidinal energies. And it's clear that the clearest expression of this tension in Freud, of course, is his oscillation between the unconscious and the id. Unconscious is a more hermeneutic unconscious, if you want. Unconscious, repressed meanings, signifiers. Id is more libido, the id, as opposed to superego and ego. It's more energetic. And I claim that there is a parallel here, that in exactly the same way that modern physics is trying to combine, and we know this is the big prize. I liked, it seems to me, as an old Stalinist, more dialectical materialist, superstring theory. But I'm an idiot. All I can do is to look for what people who know more say, and the latest results, I think, is that it's out again, superstring theory, that is dismissed. Okay, but nonetheless, I claim that that Lacan was struggling to the end with the same problem, and that his notion, elaborated in the last years of his teaching, his notion of le symptôme, symptom, synthetic man, all the associations, synthetic man, St. Thomas of Aquinas, and so on, as the elementary atom of enjoyment, is something like Lacan's attempt to bring the two together. It's the best designation of what Lacan calls symptom is a quanta of enjoyment, a minimum quanta of enjoyment. The idea enjoyment also comes in minimal quantas, these small stains, symptoms, which are, again, the elements. And since symptom is defined, Lacan uses, I discovered with surprise, sometimes even the term that it oscillates like a string, where this was Lacan's attempt at superstring theory to unite the two, the energetic libido and the other one. Now, of course, I will not go into it today, but I'm well aware of the basic epistemological problem here. The danger is always, okay, as a Stalinist, I will say right-wing, left-wing deviation. Right-wing deviation, direct naturalization. So that we say, so our symbolic structures must already be embedded in nature. You find structures like language already in nature. The opposite leftist deviation would have been a too fast historicist culturalization. The idea then being, all this only proves that we cannot get out of our language. That even when quantum physicists study nature, they had to rely on terms, mechanisms, which are really specific to our language. What I'm desperately trying to is precisely to avoid this second conclusion. I think it's too easy. Because if nothing else is, it's simply, how should I put it, it's too Kantian for me, in the sense that it doesn't even approach the question. But okay, if then all our cognition of reality is already mediated through symbolic structures, not only formally, but even at the level of content, that the structures that we perceive in nature are already secretly mediated or by the structures of language and so on. The problem is, but then I'm here an old-fashioned materialist nonetheless. But there is real out there. I don't think that language is the origin of everything and that it's just a void before. So is it then that we cannot simply, the conclusion is too symbolically solipsistic for me. The conclusion is a very comfortable one. All that we can say is within our language, so you can say it's too simple a conclusion. Okay, now we finished with this real and finally Hegel, only Hegel. What I was promising a long time, Hegelian cunning of reason. Why is, I want to start with something which Lacan tried to erase in the last years of his teaching, the extent to which, especially in the early 50s, Lacan was very pro-Hegelian. Namely, it's very interesting to read, to do something slightly evil, to read the function and speech of psychoanalysis, the fundamental Écrit, to read it the way it is in Écrit, and to compare it with how it was when it was with its original version from 53, 54, I think, published. You can see Lacan in the later rewriting desperately trying to erase all Hegelian traces, to de-Hegelianize, because it's crazy how radically pro-Hegelian Lacan is there. To put it very simply, Lacan refers there to Hegelian absolute knowing in order to propose the identification of the analyst with the Hegelian master, philosopher, who has access to absolute knowing. For Lacan, the analyst stands for the Hegelian master, the embodiment of absolute knowing. Why? Now things get complex. Precisely because he renounces all, this is the term that Badiou likes to use, forçage, in the sense of enforcing, imposing something onto reality. For Lacan and for Hegel, what characterizes the analyst is precisely utter passivity in action. And I don't have time to do this today, maybe later, maybe not, because in a short text, which I think I sent it to some small journal in Oxford where they asked me for it, I think it didn't yet appear, I approached from here the whole problem of Hegel and anal-oral economy. Like Hegel is usually perceived as the philosopher of oral economy, in the sense of to swallow everything. The concept mediates everything, and it is true. Hegel, in his naive idealist way, even likes to say how the animal eating, when we humans eat, or when animal swallow an object eat, that this is the most elementary form of conceptual grasping, of So is then the absolute knowledge, this absolute, you eat all the shit, you kind of swallow the whole world? I think not. I don't have time to develop it today, but it's so interesting how for Hegel then, when you eat everything, the concluding moment is always the opposite one. Okay, I will not pronounce the name because the title of my text is Hegel on shitting and so on. But it's literally like that the complete masterhood is precisely for Hegel to let it go, to allow to the object its own dynamics, to withdraw completely. So in this sense, who is the analyst for Hegel, or the philosopher? It's the one who is fully aware that the actual reality is already in itself rational. So he can adopt the attitude of a passive observer who does not intervene directly into the content, but only manipulates the scene so that the content destroys itself, confronted with its own inconsistencies. This is what Lacan refers to when he writes that Hegel's work is, I quote, precisely what we need to confer on a meaning, precisely what we need to confer a meaning on so-called analytic neutrality, a meaning other than that the analyst is simply in a stupor. It is this neutrality which keeps the analyst on the path of non-action. So again, the Hegelian wager is that the best way to destroy an enemy is to give him the free field to deploy their potentials, and that the enemy's success will be his failure, since the lack of external obstacles will confront him with the absolutely inherent obstacle of the inconsistency of his own position. Here is a nice quote from Hegel's Realphilosophie, from an early Hegelian text on cunning. Quote, "Cunning is something other than trickery. The most open activity is the greatest cunning. The other must be taken in its truth. In other words, with his openness, a man exposes the other in himself. He makes the other appear as he is in and for himself, and thereby does away with himself. Cunning is the great art of inducing others to be as they are in and for themselves, and to bring this out to the light of consciousness. Although others are in the right, they do not know how to defend it by means of speech. Muteness is bad, mean cunning. Consequently, a true master is at bottom only he who can provoke the other to transform himself through his acts." What does Hegel mean here? Let me give you a strange, maybe for you, example, which maybe even will not sound enough leftist politically to you. The true cunning of the American administration, and I say this with all sympathy for Cuban Revolution, would be to drop all the embargo. To say, okay, you want it, we give it to you. And unfortunately, I think that it would have worked. I think that Cuban socialism would have been over in maximum 2-3 years. I think that it's precisely, this would be the Hegelian attitude. You want end of embargo, here you have it. And I think that it's precisely the resistance against embargo which is the mobilizing point in Cuba. Without that, you just let the other. You want this, okay, you have it. The wager is, because I'm sure you will destroy itself. So you get, to put it very simply, you get the point here. The point, this is the cunning of reason. It is basically the cunning of unreason. At its most elementary. It is not, okay, let's allow all the mess. I'm sure that somehow secretly reason will prevail. It's not, I can rely on some mysterious agency that, which, I don't know, divine wisdom, reasoning history, that events will take the right course. It's quite on the contrary. What Hegel calls, I claim, cunning of reason, it's, to put it in a slightly cynical way, it's rather a deep trust that have it your way, because I'm sure that somehow you will screw it up if you want, that things will go wrong. And that will be your truth. You will undo yourself. This is why, as I developed already years ago, but I like to repeat it, this is why, with all my respect for Derrida, when Derrida reproaches Lacan with for his formula, the letter always arrives at its destination as teleological formula. It means letter never just disseminates itself, that it's hidden teleology. I think that he gets it wrong. Letter arrives at its destination means simply, to put it in this, I think this is, I don't know if this is a general term or I heard it only in Orson Welles' manuscript, that you will get your come-uppance, or how they call it. No, you know, sometimes I find myself as speaking a weird language. I read wonderful memoirs of, literally, of a guy who was the American translator. I mean, there with direct debate with Russian president, American translator, and he said that it's so strange that they spoke a very nice English, the Russian translators, but English learned not through talking with real Englishmen, but from mostly Dickens and authors like this. And then it was so comical. For example, Gorbachev said to Reagan, I don't agree with here, you are trying, and then the translation was fiddlesticks or some kind of or that Reagan was so shocked when Gorbachev told him something, you are trying to deceive me, and then the translation ran, you are trying to hang noodles around my ears and so on. Since Reagan was not exactly the most witty guy, it was strange, no? So my point is that when I use these terms like come-uppance, it's as if I'm sorry for it, speak this kind of but what I want to say is that, you got my point. Another way, the Freudian way, to say a letter always arrives at its destination is to say there is no repression without the return of the repressed. It says that, you know, there will always be a symptom, something that will screw up things for you. So the ultimate wager, again, it's not positive cunning of reason. Whatever the confusion appears, some higher power guarantees that it will turn out okay. It's on the contrary. No matter how good your plans are, some higher power, if you want, will take care that it will screw up your plans. And that will be your truth. That is to say, to put it in more modern terms, the inherent antagonism will destroy you. Or even to put it in the terms of the logic of desire even. It's not that you don't get what you desire. It's that you never really know what you desire. Hegel is here more radical. You desire something, then you fight for it, then you get something and you say, oh, that's not what I wanted. No, this is truly what you wanted. So, let's go on now a little bit more in this logic. The fundamental, as it were, mechanism of the properly Hegelian reversal is thus that, to put it in very naive terms, you try to do something, you have a plan. This plan fails, but then you have to make a strange shift of perspective where you realize how the very apparent failure was a success, but measured with a different measure. That's the proper dialectical reversal, where, to put it in slightly cynical terms, and I think Hegel is cynical here, there is always a success, not because there is always a success simply, but because even if I fail, I change the measure so that it's a success. Or as Barbara Johnson put it nicely long ago in his defense of Lacan against Derrida, the letter always arrives at its destination, not because it cannot miss it, but because retroactively, wherever it arrives, we retroactively say that was its destination, you know. It's a little bit like my favorite conformist phrase, this is the cunning of reason. You know that wonderful, I think even Hegel quotes it, saying by the great conformist of French Napoleon politics, Talleyrand. You know that famous, where he was having, I don't know, dinner, lunch with people, and they heard sounds of street battle outside. And Talleyrand said, you see, our side is winning. They asked him, okay, but which side is winning? He said, I don't know, I will learn this tomorrow, you know. This is how the letter arrives at its destination, if you want, no? So, you know, it's something like, okay, let me give you now, to make this absolutely clear, a couple of surprising examples, and then, of course, to complicate things a little bit. I'm very sorry, but since I live here across the street, almost, that Mecklenburg Place down there, it's on that, okay, whatever street, Dickens' house. I must say I have a very soft spot for Dickens. And The Great Expectations is the model in this sense of a Hegelian novel. Why? You know, Pip is designated as a man of great expectations. Everybody perceives this as the forecast of his worldly success. However, at the novel's end, when he abandons London's false glamour and returns to his modest childhood community, we get it that this was the true great expectation. No? That what appears as his social failure is his true greatness. This kind of a shift. Or let me give you another example now, or even two other examples, which will be a little bit more surprising. One would be of this, how you shift the measure. I remember how all of my friends are shocked when they read Brecht's infamous statement apropos of the accused in the Moscow show trials of the 30s. Brecht said, and this appears as the ultimate arch-Stalinist statement, Brecht said, even if they are really innocent, you know, the liberals proclaim, but wait a minute, Bukharin and so on, but they are innocent. Brecht said, if they are innocent, they deserve all the more to be shot. Now, this can be read as the ultimate Stalinist madness, which is, even if they are innocent, they are not innocent, because their very insistence on their innocence means that they prefer, that the accused preferred their bourgeois subjectivity, individuality, to the needs of the party. If you really are ready to sacrifice yourself for the party, you would say, who cares if I'm innocent or not? Obviously, the party needs my blood now, and I will gladly give it. So, the very form of asserting your innocence is your guilt. That is to say, formally, it means you stick to the bourgeois individual morality, blah, blah, blah. This is the reading, the official reading. Brecht, horrible, ultra-Stalinist. But from a friend of mine told me, who had a look into some new Brecht archives now, that, okay, this is typical Brechtian hypocrisy, that he put another reading only in his private notes. But Brecht had a different thing in mind here. It was much nastier. His logic was this one. And in this sense, I think we can even agree with Brecht. He said, Stalin was a terrible criminal. He deserved to be killed. And the accused were accused basically in the big trial, you remember, I was telling you stories of trying to kill Stalin. The accused effectively, since they were Stalin's collaborators, I mean, they were meeting him, some of them even members of the Politburo, they effectively were in a position to kill Stalin. And they didn't do it. In this sense, if they're innocent, they deserve to be shot. They had a chance to get rid, all of us, of one of the greatest monsters of the 20th century. And they didn't do it. They deserve to be shot. They didn't use the opportunity. Like, you know, if you are in front of Hitler, my God, your duty is to kill him. But you got the effect here. There's this change in perspective, like another one, the famous Goering's one, although it's wrongly attributed to Goering. When I hear the word culture, I reach for my pistol, for my gun. But you know that Goering, we are reading it in a correct way now, but Goering meant it in the opposite way. Goering's meaning was, whenever I hear the word culture, I know it's not just intellectuals. I think about how our German culture is threatened today, and I reach for my gun to protect the German culture from Jewish, Russian, barbarian, Slavic, whatever you want, barbarians. So he meant this, but of course, the truth is, he is the barbarian. Now comes an example which will maybe surprise you a little bit from Buddhism. You know that there are three main schools of Buddhism. The main split of Buddhism is the one between Hinayana, the small will, and Mahayana, the great will. The first one is elitist, demanding, trying to maintain the fidelity to Buddha's teaching, focusing on the individual's effort to get rid of the illusion of the self to attain enlightenment. The second school, Mahayana, arose through the split from the first one. It subtly shifts the accent onto compassion with others. Its central figure is Bodhisattva, the individual who, after achieving enlightenment, decides out of compassion to return to the world of material illusions in order to help others to achieve enlightenment. That is to say, to work for the end of suffering of all sentient beings. And I think this is where things go wrong. The split is here irreducible. Working for one's own enlightenment reasserts the centrality of the self in the very striving for its overcoming. While the great will, way out of this predicament, just repeats the deadlock, the Mahayana version, in a displaced way. Egotism is overcome, but the price is that universal enlightenment itself turns into an object of the instrumental activity of the self. You get my point. I think you cannot escape it. Whatever you do it, if you do Hinayana or Mahayana, I think you get caught in an antagonism. So I really think that although it's usually praised as more authentic, the beauty of this thought, you postpone your own enlightenment. You return to this miserable reality of passions to help all others to reach enlightenment. I think this is the beginning of the ethical fiasco, because it introduces the logic of self-sacrifice and so on, which is, I think, the origin of all difficulties. But now we have the third school, Vajrayana, which predominates in Tibet and Mongolia, and which is often dismissed as a reinscription of Buddhism into traditional ritualistic magic practices. We have all those things that we like to make fun of, like the praying wheels and so on, the total fanatical codification, ritualization, hierarchy, and so on and so on. But my point here is not to make fun of these superstitious features of the Tibetan Buddhism, because it's easy to say the first two, that is to say Hinayana, Mahayana, are authentic ones, while the Tibetan Buddhism is a primitive regression to superstitious practices. It is true that it's difficult to imagine a more radical contrast as between Buddha's beginning, where, as you know, the point was, I don't care if God exists, I don't care what techniques you use, I don't care about rituals, all I care is to effectively, pragmatically help people stop suffering. Can it be anything more opposed to it than this Tibetan Buddhist approach of all that matters is to do properly the ritual, to repeat 1,000 times a day this, to pray and so on, just to... But you know what's the paradox? The paradox is that if you are truly a pragmatic, you should accept the Tibetan way. Because if you say like Buddha, what matters is, does it work or not? But what is precisely the ritualization works? That is to say, what if this way, which appears to be the most ritualized, non-pragmatic, it doesn't matter if you are happy or not, what matters is that you strictly obey the ritual. What if this is the way, the only way which effectively functions to make you happy? It is to make a tasteless comparison. Isn't it a little bit like in sexuality? You know that if you are in trouble, men, usually impotence and so on, the worst thing is to say, forget about all the rules, don't take it as a duty, just relax and do it. That's formula for sabotage. The thing that works is a more Tibetan approach. It's to say, let me forget about myself and let's treat performing sexual act as a pure bureaucratic duty. You sit down with a partner and you say, okay, I will first put your finger there. No, you will put it there. No, and you have a long Stalinist debate, and I will guarantee you after half an hour you will say, I'm tired of this, let's fuck or whatever, and it will. But you get my point. The opposite works. The bureaucratic approach works. In the same way, but you get the point that I was trying to make. Apparently, there is the radical opposition. Authentic Buddha, don't care about rituals, just leave suffering, and then this crazy hierarchic alienation here of Tibetan Buddhism. But what if that precisely works, measured by the strictest standards? Okay, now let's go a little bit further. We are not dealing here with a simple reversal of the formula. We are dealing with the way a contradiction is, how should I put it, reformulated. What happens with contradiction in the Hegelian process? Let me take a simple example. The notion of liberalism. the way this notion, liberalism, functions in today's discourse. Its main meanings focus on two opposite poles. We have, on the one hand, economic liberalism, free market individualism, opposition to strong state regulation, and so on and so on. On the other hand, we have political libertarian liberalism, accent on equality, social solidarity, permissiveness, multicultural tolerance, and so on and so on. Like in the United States, Republicans are more liberal in the first sense, Democrats, of course, in the second sense. The point is that it's meaningless to ask which is the true liberalism. Of course, people like Hayek would say our individualist market liberalism is the true liberalism. Your liberalism of equality, human rights already has the despotic state intervention potentials, while on the other hand, again, left liberals would have said, no, yours is a road to slavery, to economic slavery, only through affirmative action and so on can true liberty be guaranteed. But what Hegel would have simply said is that this opposition of two aspects of liberalism is inherent to the very notion of liberalism, that it marks precisely the historical limit of the notion of liberalism. That it's not, you see, here we have what I was talking about before, this wisdom of the cunning of reason. Don't fight liberalism. Let it develop and it will get caught into this tension, and you cannot resolve it. That liberalism is defined by this tension, which is also the tension inscribed into how the notion of freedom functions today. That is to say, what happens here is that, how to put it, what appears as a contradiction, failure of the idea, turns into the central feature of the idea. It's not a contradiction which is a limitation of the notion of liberalism. It's a contradiction which defines liberalism, this tension. So now I come to the crucial point for today. How does this reversal work? It's not only a reversal of a predicate into subject, but a more complex reversal. Let me take a terrifying example here. It's a very male chauvinist one, but the logic works. You know the well-known male chauvinist wisdom or notion of how, in contrast to men's self-identity, the essence of woman is dispersed, elusive, displaced. The thing to do here is to move from this claim that the essence of woman is forever dispersed to the more radical claim that this dispersion, displacement, as such is the essence of femininity. This is what Hegel deployed as the dialectical shift in which the predicate turns into the subject. You know the old Rabinovich joke that I repeat all the time: I want to emigrate out of Soviet Union for two reasons. The first reason, communism will disappear. The bureaucrat says, but communism will last forever. Well, that's my second reason, and so on. It's the same here. Imagine Rabinovich coming at an exam of psychoanalysis and said, I found the essence of femininity. The professor answers, but you cannot find it. Femininity is a dark continent, dispersed, displaced. Well, this dispersion is the essence of femininity, and so on. And I claim that such a shift signals or characterizes the very formal structure of subjectivity. What does this mean? Let me explain it through the structure of supposition. Lacan, as you all know, or should know, developed first the notion of the analyst as the subject supposed to know, which arises through transference. Supposed to know what? The meaning of the patient symptoms. And again, to repeat my own example, if you want to get what the subject supposed to know means, just take what is, I think, the nicest example from TV series, you know, the good old Columbo with Peter Falk. I like that series because it breaks two basic rules of detective series. One is that whodunit is not a problem. You know how the series was structured. No, first you see exactly how the murder was done, who did it, and so on. So this, I think, proves that they're wrong, those who think that at the end you learn whodunit. No, the true mystery is the deduction, how you connect what really happened with the deceiving appearance and so on and so on. Okay, but the other thing the central mystery of Colombo's series is that after the murder, Colombo arrives on the scene, and in a totally mysterious way, from the very beginning, he knows who did it. Did you notice this? He simply focuses on a guy and harasses him or her, blah, blah, blah. But it's very mysterious why this, even without any, he just arrives and knows. This subject, okay. Then we have the subject supposed to believe, which would be precisely the subject, if you want, supposed not to know. What I called 2 days ago, the one for whom the appearances should be protected. Then we have, of course, the subject supposed to enjoy. The subject of sexual envy, it can be racist sexual envy, blacks really enjoy, can satisfy our women more than us, and so on and so on. So the structure here is clear. Subject supposed to know is knowledge, S2 in Lacanian mathems. Subject supposed to believe is S1, the master, small a, surplus enjoyment. Subject supposed to enjoy. So what would be then the fourth element, the subject? Do we get a subject supposed to be subject? No, I think what we get is that, this is the shift I'm talking about. From the subject supposed to something, supposed to know, supposed to enjoy, supposed to believe, we should pass to subject itself as a supposition. And I think this is Lacan's most radical thesis. It's not that only that as a subject caught in intersubjective networks, I'm always supposed to something, like a naive child supposed not to know. Those, or even in communism, I think that you find this tension between know, not to know, in the figure of the Stalinist leader, but not only Stalinist leader. That's already the whole mystery of Potemkin's villages. How, on the one hand, the leader is wisdom, knows everything, but at the same time, we should cover up the vulgarity, failures, so that the leader's eye will not perceive them. If I read it correctly in one older biography of Mao, the greatest Potemkin's village was when, in the Great Famine 57-58, later, Mao took a long ride by the train about 2,000-3,000 miles. And you know what they did? This is true Potemkin's village. They reconstructed happy villages and so on along the entire rail line. So that whenever Mao would say, oh, let's stop and see how farmers are, they wanted to be sure that there was a happy village there. Okay, so here always the subject is supposed to something, to know, to enjoy, to believe. But what about the subject itself as a supposition? It's not only that subject is supposed to something, it is itself a supposition. What does this mean? Let us imagine a proposition, a statement. How does this statement get subjectivized? When some reflexive feature inscribes into it the subjective attitude. You know, like if a machine repeats something, it's not subjectivized. But if you suspect some feature inscribing into it a subjective attitude, that somebody not only says something, but relates to it in a way, this subjectivizes it. The subject is the absent X that has to be supposed in order to account for this distortion, reflexive twist, whatever. Okay, now you will say, but this holds only for the other subject. Like when this would be even maybe the point of those tests of artificial intelligence, that this is how we identify a text as a text behind which there stands a subject, through this twists, reflective twists, distortions. Like, you know, when a machine goes on, when a machine goes wrong, then we are for a brief moment usually not sure. Did the machine simply go wrong, or did it go wrong, to put it in a stupid way, in a meaningful way? If this, we suppose a subject. There must be a subject. You know, like those stories which I love, because I'm afraid of flying, that, for example, you fly and then the voice tells you, be sure nothing goes wrong on this plane. Whenever in the strong turbulence I hear this announcement, my dream is always that then things are really bad. When the captain tells you everything is under control, no, that you are really listening to a pre-recorded message, and that if you look through the window, you already see the captain jumping down. No, but okay, so when this would be when things go wrong, or when the message, this proverbial message where the voice says this computer cannot go wrong, cannot go wrong, cannot go wrong, and it goes wrong into this, you would say is just a malfunctioning. But when this malfunctioning occurs at some significant point, whatever, okay, you suppose subjectivity. Now you will say, but this is only when we are confronting something, that we suppose an X behind. I claim, and I will try to prove next week, apropos of close reading of Hegel's Anthropology, that the craziest dimension of the German idealist notion of subjectivity is that precisely you are a subject, as a subject, you are a supposition also for yourself. That what you are all the time haunted by is yourself, but yourself in the sense of, how should I put it? You know this classical human notion of, classical human critique of the self, like there is no self. If I look deep, this is the most classical Hume, no? If I look into myself, all I found are always particular ideas, perceptions, and so on. There is no self. Yes, there is no self. You presuppose it. And okay, I don't have time to go into it now, but the idea is that precisely this is why the notion of double is so traumatic. It's not simply there is out somebody like me, but out there I would really exist. It's as if I am no longer just a supposition, I am posited out there. This is why, again, for Hegel, this is the source of madness, as I will develop, apropos of habit, madness, and so on. That the subject is a void, but a void which is haunted by what it would have been as an existing object, as it were. That the subject is never just this empty I think. You are always haunted by the notion of what I am as an object, which even brings us to the notion of hysteria. For Hegel, subjectivity is for this reason fundamentally hysterical, because again, the basic hysterical question for Freud, Lacan, is precisely what for an object I am. That is to say, when people say hysteria, desire, no, it's not what I desire. It's not this stupidity, I don't know what I want, blah, blah, blah. The original question of desire is this perplexion of the small child, you know, like, I see that others see something in me. They want something from me. What is it in me that makes me an object of libidinal investment for others? Here, women are structurally, okay, if you accept even that hysteria is more feminine, more intelligent than men, because male stupidity is that male are obsessionals. Men think that the enigma is only out there, woman, but that they know what they are. Okay, but that's another point. But you got my basic point here is that it's not simply subject supposed to, that subject as such is a presupposition, which then haunts us through double, whatever, deadlock. All these nightmarish living dead are figures where you would fully substantially exist, where you would not only be, where your self would exist as an object. So let's go on. Apropos this reversal. This reversal towards itself is the key dialectical moment. Let me give you now, to make it really clear, a couple of examples. For Hegel, he likes to emphasize how if an idea cannot adequately represent itself, if its representation is distorted, deficient, then this distortion simultaneously signals a limit, a deficiency of the idea itself. This is an eternal Hegelian motive. If empirical actualization of an idea disappoints you, then the idea itself wasn't strong enough to be able to actualize itself, so it was limited. But one should make a step further here. Now comes the central trick. not only does the universal idea always appear in a distorted, displaced way, the idea is nothing but this distortion, displacement, the self-inadequacy of the particular with regard to itself. And one could even claim that this reversal formally defines subjectivity. Substance is something which appears in phenomena, while a subject is nothing but its own appearance. And we have many of these formulas, like the universal is nothing but the inadequacy, the non-identity of the particular with itself. The essence is nothing but the inadequacy of the appearance to itself. This means that for Hegel, let's say, what does it mean that there is an essence behind appearance? It means that the appearance is inconsistent, that there is a crack in the order of appearances. Essence, let me give you an example here. When Hegel says this stupid phrase, which is often repeated, the essence is only as rich as it appears. That is to say, there is no hidden inner essence. The wealth of essence is in the wealth of appearances. Hegel does not simply mean this stupidity that the essence has to appear, in the sense of it must develop all its moments. No, it has to appear as essence within appearances. Within the appearances, there should be an appearance which, as it were, points beyond appearances. And this crack within the appearances is all that essence is. If you know Lacan a little bit, you got it where I'm aiming at. The famous Lacan's reference to those old Greek story about two painters competing, Zeus' Parasios, no? When one wins through perfect realistic depiction where even the birds then hit the painting thinking these are real grapes, but the other guy just paints a curtain. And then when the first guy comes to check it, say, okay, let's see, what did you paint? Reveal the curtain. That's the appearance. That it's what appears is appearance as such. That is to say, the essence has to inscribe itself into appearance as essence. How does it inscribe itself? Precisely as a gap distortion. This is what I was telling you the last time. You remember when I spoke about concrete universality, how the problem for Hegel is how does universality emerge out of the particular? Where? Precisely where there are cracks in the particular, where the particular does not fully fit itself. So let's go on here. The structure here is the one of, again, of minimal difference. That is to say, the structure of when a thing appears is, as it were, a sign of itself, relates to itself, but not in the sense, but how should I put it? The thing becomes its own appearance without there being a substance behind appearing. Let me give you so that, okay, now you'll say this is confused. Okay, it is, but I will give you a nice quote, which I use it in one of my books from my good friend Robert Faller, who developed this paradoxical logic of how a thing can function as a substitute for itself. I quote Robert Faller. What is substituted can also appear itself in the role of the substitute. There only must be some feature ensuring that it is not taken to be itself. Such a feature is provided for by the threshold which separates the place of what is substituting from what is being substituted. Then he gives some examples. Radical one example. Radical right-wing opponents of male homosexuality in the United States act in a they organize gay bashings in the course of which they beat up and finally rape gays, homosexuals. The ultimate homicidal or homosexual gratification of drives can therefore also be attained if it only fulfills the condition of evoking the semblance of a countermeasure. What seems to be opposition has the effect that the X to be fended off can appear itself and be taken for a non-X. You got it, that what this gay people engaged in gay bashing do is they exactly repeat the homosexual act, but it functions as its opposite. There are even, okay, let me give you another example from my own experience. When, in the early days of video, when I was taping films, I, of course, I didn't quite trust the mechanism. So I was always worrying that something will be wrong with the recording. So I anxiously watched the TV while the tape was running, just to be sure that everything is okay. So the paradox is here that I did watch a film, even very closely, but in a kind of suspended state, without really following it. All that interested me was that everything was really there. I think we find something similar in a certain perverse sexual economy, in which I perform the act only in order to be sure that I can in future really perform the act. The act was the same, but you get my point. It didn't really count. The act was, in a way, a sign of itself. Or, to give you yet another strange, two other examples. One I quote, the other one is a new one. Already in a book, the wonderful adventure I was told in Argentina when, in that economic fiasco in 2001, Argentinians went to the street to protest against the government and especially against Cavallo, the economy minister. He was found himself under siege in a Ministry of Finance or Economy, but so he escaped. How? He put on a mask. Of what? Of himself. Because he was so hated that people were selling his mask. So he put on his mask and nobody suspected that his mask would be himself. It worked. So, in a similar way, I had recently a very strange dream. I was dreaming that I had a chest pain, because I often am afraid of panic attacks and so on. And how did I prolong my sleep? No, sorry. Then when I awakened, I discovered that I really have a chest pain. So you see the irony. I had a chest pain and I prolonged my dream by transforming this chest pain into a dream, which was only a dream that I have a chest pain. I mean, it's just pure repetition. Nothing, if you want, nothing effectively happened. So, I hope you got the point here. The point is that, how should I put it, in this kind of a pure repetition, appearance enters, but like that, that curtain drawn by, I don't know which one, Zeltsus or Parasios, one of the two, where the curtain doesn't conceal something hidden behind. All it tries, what it conceals is precisely that it's just a painting, that there is nothing behind. So it's an appearance, but a pure appearance, in the sense of what's behind is just an X. Okay. The idea being that this precisely, this defines subjectivity. This subjectivity is correlative with this kind of a pure appearance. Let me give you, again, since we are here in England, another of my favorite examples in All's Well That Ends Well. And don't be afraid, I didn't read Shakespeare. My source is that wonderful book, Rough Guide to Shakespeare. That's my limit. Shakespeare, you know the story, All's Well That Ends Well. Count Bertram, who on the king's orders was forced to marry Helen, a common doctor's daughter, refuses to live with her and to consummate the marriage. He tells her that he will agree to be her husband only if she removes the ancestral ring from his finger and bears his child. At the same time, Bertram tries to seduce the young, beautiful Diana. Now, Helen and Diana are friends. They concoct a plan to bring Bertram back to his wife, Helen. How? Diana agrees to spend the night with Bertram, telling him to visit her chamber at midnight. There, in darkness, the couple exchange their rings and make love. However, unknowingly to Bertram, the woman with whom he spent the night was not Diana but Helen, his own wife. So when they are later confronted, Bertram, has to admit that both of his conditions for recognizing the marriage are met. What then was the status of this bad trick? At the very end of Act 3, Helen provides a wonderful definition. Quote, why then tonight let us assign our plot, which if it speed is wicked meaning in a lawful deed and lawful meaning in a wicked act, were both not sin and yet a sinful fact, and so on and so on. We are effectively dealing both with a wicked meaning in a lawful deed. What can be more lawful than a consummated marriage, a husband sleeping with his wife, and yet the meaning is wicked. Bertram thought he's sleeping with Diana, not with his wife. And a lawful meaning in a wicked act. The meaning, Helen's intention is lawful, to sleep with her husband. But the act is wicked. She deceives her husband, who does it thinking he's cheating on her. Their affair is then not sin and yet a sinful fact. Not sin because what happened was merely a consummation of marriage, but a sinful fact, something that involved intentional cheating from both partners. The true question here is not only whether all's well that ends well, whether the final outcome, nothing wrong effectively happened, cancels the sinful tricks and intentions, but a more radical one. What if the rule of law can only be asserted through wicked, sinful meanings and acts? What if in order to rule, the law has to rely on this subterranean interplay of cheatings and deceptions? This, I think, is maybe what Lacan aims at with his paradoxical proposition "il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel." There is no sexual relationship. Was not Bertram's situation during the night of love the fate of most married couples? You make love to your lawful partner while cheating in your mind, fantasizing that you are doing it with another partner. So it is as if the actual sex relationship has to be sustained by this phantasmatic supplement. So again, now we come to the next crucial point. The crucial fact here is that it's not simply the way. This is, I think, why this title of Shakespeare is very Hegelian, all's well that ends well. What does it mean? Does it mean, okay, a little bit of tricks, but this would be the simple teleological reading. We are allowed bad tricks and so on if they are done for the legitimate person. And here, purpose. The purpose is legitimate, the consummation of marriage and so on, so we can do all the tricks. But what if we shift the accent and say, but what kind of a law is this which, in order to sustain itself, needs cheating? Who mediates what here? The standard Hegelian reading of the dialectic of law and its criminal transgression would have been that, of course, Hegel admits that the law can reproduce itself only through criminal transgressions, that law always involves the dialectical movement of the negation of negation. Law is negated in the criminal transgression, and then law sublates, the Hegelian Aufhebung, subsumes into its movement through punishment and so on its transgression. So that's the standard critique of Hegel. Restrained economy, Hegel allows negativity, transgression, but only as a subordinated moment of the self-mediation of the law. But what if things are a little bit more complex here? What if it is the other way around? That not only the criminal transgression is mediated by the law, but the law, what if the law is in itself criminalized? Criminalized in the sense that not only is the transgression a moment, particular moment of the law, but law is also nothing but the universalized transgression. What do I mean by this? Here a wonderful quote from the beginning of Chesterton's The Man Who Was Thursday, where Chesterton has a wonderful, conservative, of course, critique of modern intellectuals as the true criminals, precisely because they are universal criminals. Here is this wonderful quote. We say, from Chesterton, The Man Who Was Thursday, we say that the most dangerous criminal now is the entirely lawless modern philosopher. Compared to him, burglars and bigamists are essentially moral men. My heart goes out to them. They, burglars, bigamists, accept the essential ideal of man, They only seek it wrongly. Thieves respect property. They only wish the property to become their property, so that they may more perfectly respect it. But philosophers dislike property as property. They wish to destroy the very idea of personal possession. Bigamists respect marriage, or they would not go through the highly ceremonial and ever ritualistic formality of bigamy. But philosophers despise marriage as marriage. Murderers respect human life. They only wish to attain a greater fullness of human life in themselves by the sacrifice of those of what seems to them to be lesser lives. But philosophers hate life itself, their own as much as other people's. The common criminal is a bad man, but at least he is, as it were, a conditional good man. He says that if only a certain obstacle be removed, say a wealthy uncle, he is then prepared to accept the universe and to praise God. He is a reformer, but not an anarchist. He wishes to cleanse the edifice, but not to destroy it. But the evil philosopher is not trying to alter things, but to annihilate them. This is a wonderful theory which then goes into this idea of, we will talk about this later, of that what we need today is intellectual police. The police not only looking for particular criminals, but as Chesterton put it, which circulates intellectual parties, artist circles, universities, to look for these universal criminals, which are the true source of it. But nonetheless, I think that Chesterton is not radical enough here. What he doesn't get is that universalized crime is no longer a crime. It overcomes itself as crime, and it turns transgression into a new order. He, Chesterton, is right to claim that compared to the entirely lawless philosopher, burglars, bigamists, even murderers are essentially moral. A thief is a conditionally good man. He doesn't deny property as such. He just wants more property for himself. However, the conclusion to be drawn from this is that crime as such is essentially moral. It wants just a particular illegal reordering of the global moral order which should remain. In a truly Hegelian spirit, one should bring this proposition of the essential morality of the crime to its immanent reversal. Not only is crime essentially moral, morality itself is essentially criminal. Again, not only in the sense that the universal moral order necessarily negates itself in particular crimes, but more radically, in the sense that the way morality asserts itself is already in itself a crime. Property is theft, as they used to say in the 19th century. That is to say, one should pass from theft as a particular criminal violation of the universal form of property to this form itself as a criminal violation. What Chesterton fails to perceive is that the universalized crime that he projects into lawless modern philosophy and its political equivalent, the anarchist movement, already exist in the guise of the existing rule of law. What I think he doesn't see is that nightmare, these anarchists who want to destroy everything, that they are already in power. In what way? I'm not, now you will say, okay, it's easy to pull this cheap Marxist trick. No, I think that Chesterton simply wasn't radical enough here, that elsewhere he knew it. For example, in his wonderful short text, Defense of the Detective Story, he remarks how, quote, the detective story keeps in some sense before the mind the fact that civilization itself is the most sensational of departures and the most romantic of rebellions. When the detective is a police, when the detective in a police romance stands alone and somewhat fatuously, fearless amid the knives and fists of a thief's kitchen, it does certainly serve to make us remember that it is the agent of social justice which is the original and poetic figure, while the burglars and footpads are merely placid old cosmic conservatives, happy in the immemorial respectability of apes and wolves. The police romance is based on the fact that morality is the most dark and daring of conspiracies. You see, here he knows it, that the external opposition between law and its transgression is transformed into the opposition internal to what? Not to the law, but to transgression. You know, you see my point. The usual critique of Hegel is that the encompassing unity between law and its transgression is the law. The law mediates its negations and so on. But I think the properly Hegelian move is the opposite one. It is that the unity is crime, that the tension between law and crime is inherent to crime. Crime is the universalized law. Crime is the law which law is the crime which universalized itself. Law is the crime elevated at the level of universality. That's what he says here. And I think that in this sense, The Man Who Was Thursday should be read in a very precise way. What goes on later in the novel does not simply illustrate this plan of universal police. This is only the one-sided view. The final message that the supreme criminal is the same person as this supreme policeman, is God himself, precisely tells this story. That God, the whole message of Chesterton, and this is for him the big thing, if you want, about Christianity, is that God has to be at the same time the greatest transgressor, the greatest criminal itself. That, in other words, God and devil are the same. I mean, we must go here to the end. In what sense? What effectively happens here? Let me finish with another short mediation precisely on this topic of negation, sublation, and so on and so on. What is Hegel's point of why is Christianity for Hegel so revolutionary? What happens in Christianity through Christ and so on? It's that before we have God who is a substantial, real God. God as being, existing prior to the world, whatever. This God dies on the cross and is resuscitated as Holy Ghost. But Hegel makes it clear what is Holy Ghost. As I developed, I think in my first talk here, apropos of the big other, Holy Ghost is a virtual entity. It exists only on the terrain of finite human existence. Holy Ghost is the virtuality to which we refer. And Hegel says it literally. He says that the only site of the infinite is finite human life. There is no infinity anywhere else. Infinity, ghost, is only gains actuality as aspect of human practice. What does this mean? This means that we should be very precise here. When Hegel says God dies and then God is resuscitated, this does not mean that somehow in the negation of negation and so on, we magically return to infinity, to divine. It's not this God, stupid God playing games with itself. Okay, I pretend to die, then I return to myself. When God is dead, God is dead. That is to say, every notion of substantial infinity, there is some higher reality out there and so on, that's over. God dies definitely. That is to say, the only site where things, the death of God means that the only locality, site where things can happen is the finitude of human passions and so on and so on. And God's return means that the infinite dimension has to return as an aspect of this finite life. It has to be reinvented as virtual at this level. So you got my point. My point is that when people speak about Hegelian Aufhebung, cancellation, elevation, they usually read it as if the finite has to be aufgehoben, cancelled in the infinite. That the finite does not have reality, it should be rendered only part of an ideal movement. But I think there is a more radical Aufhebung in Hegel. It's not that we have finite moments and then they are aufgehoben, sublated, cancelled in their immediacy, they become moments of ideal totality. No, the problem is the status of this totality itself. You know that the Hegelian term Aufhebung has three meanings: to cancel, to negate something, to maintain it, and to elevate it on a higher level. What is truly aufgehoben, sublated in this sense, is God himself, not reality. God in the Holy Ghost, God is A, negated, he dies, B, continues to live, but in the elevated form, what elevated form? Of the Holy Ghost, which is the purely virtual, if you want, spiritual human community, which only exists at the level of the finitude. So again, you got my point here. My point is that it's not that the movement is in particularization, like God alienates itself. No, God loses itself, and the very, how should you put it, shift focuses to the finite universe. God has to be reinvented there as the, okay, simply, as a finite community. So now, to recapitulate things, I hope you got it how I tried to repeat at three levels the same movement. First, in the cunning of reason. The cunning of reason does not mean there is some teleology in the vulgar sense of some higher authorities controlling events all the time. No, that higher authority precisely loses. And the cunning of reason means that through that lost, a new order is retroactively, chaotically recreated. It doesn't mean God controls the universe. It means God screws it up, and through this failure, in an improvised, retroactive way, something new emerges. It's in this sense the cunning of unreason. Again, as I already said, the ultimate Hegelian wager is, for sure, things will somehow go wrong. That's the only way to get something new. Second thing, again, with respect to displacement and so on, the crucial passage is the passage from predicate to subject. That is to say, from, for example, as I said, from essence appears to essence is only its own appearance. From essence expresses itself in a contradictory way to this contradiction is the essence of the essence. So that what appears as a predicate, secondary, is elevated into the central feature itself, and the last feature, which is variation, where we are dealing with the tension between universal particular, law, its criminal transgression, how the Hegelian point is not that we have a law or a noble beginning goodness, which somehow, that's the usual notion of Hegel, no? What does it mean, reason in history? God guards, is a benevolent authority over our history, and of course there are terrible things happening, but God takes care that all particular evils somehow serve the higher purpose. At the end, everything is economically used for some higher purpose. No, it's precisely not this. What Hegel's point is precisely the opposite one. How good arises out of, if you want, self-reflection, self-relating of evil itself. That is to say, how at the level of crime, law itself is crime elevated to universality. That is to say that the encompassing unity of law and its criminal transgression is transgression. That, my God, to quote Chesterton again, the police, based on the fact that morality is the most dark and daring of conspiracies. In other words, that the legal order is the most dark and daring of all crimes. It's really like Brecht says, what is the robbing of a bank compared to the founding of a new bank? To put it in these terms, what is breaking the law comparing to the much higher crime of founding the new law? Now, of course, it's another question if this is the entire truth of Hegel's dialectics and so on and so on. I just, again, all I wanted to do today is just to shatter a little bit this usual prejudices about Hegel. I'm sorry if I was a little bit confused. As usually, next Tuesday, I will first clarify some more things about this logic of negation, and then finally I will go on to Chesterton, the man who was Thursday. We still have a couple of minutes, please, if there are some questions. This, to warn you, if some of you are getting bored, the first talk of next week will be even more abstract, and then we slowly start to move towards politics, Foucault, Heidegger, all those things. Please, if there are some, just now I'm alone, myopic, so please, if I ignore some of you, it is not only because I am an anti-feminist racist or whatever, but it's only at least a little bit objectively. Okay, you and you. Sorry? Less? Yeah. You are also anti-feminist. Okay. So we are not colleagues. Okay, I will remember that. Okay. So if but then I saw, okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. That's a very nice question. I think a very precise answer could be given here. I don't have time to go into it because, okay, the first problem is, you know, when Lacan criticizes Hegel, it's usually a certain simplified image of Hegel and so on. But what Lacan aims at is that sublimation is not part of the symbolic totality, but it's that you take, of course, as he said, his definition, you know it may be better than me, or sublimation is it's an object elevated to the dignity of the thing. That is to say, precisely when mediation, dialectical mediation fails, an element has to embody this very failure. Here I accept it. My only point is, yes, and that's Hegel's point, where, for example, in this sense, king is sublime for Hegel. King means the ultimate failure of, in the usual sense, rational mediation of state. King is precisely, as Hegel puts it nicely, non-sublated. Hegel says all other men, humans, have to become what they are through their hard work. Okay, not really. But Hegel's point is that the king is what he is by his birth already. He is the paradox of the, with us, you know, humanity for Hegel is the power of mediation, you work, transform, blah, blah, blah. But king is precisely the exception. A king is what he is by his birth, by his body. He is, in this sense, precisely the non-sublated, non-mediated element. Which is why Hegel makes it very clearly that the king is basically an appendix of his own penis, no, and so on. Like, but why is this moment needed? Here is the greatest point of Hegel, that at the end, sublation, Aufhegung, has to sublate itself, in the sense that Hegel was well aware that sublation always fails, everything cannot be mediated. So the only way to build a totality is to add a lowest irrational element, stupid king, and to say he already is the totality. To posit him as the contingent embodiment of totality. And I think this logic of Hegel, this logic of how at the highest point the totality has to be embodied in the lowest, you find all the time. Now, the difference between standard reading of Hegel and mine, but not only mine, all refined readings, Derrida was aware of this, is that the usual way to act against Hegel is to say, no, Hegel thought everything can be mediated. He didn't see that something fails, and then this failure to mediate everything has to be embodied in a sublime element. But again, I claim that this reflexive twist is the final moment of dialectical process. It's absolutely inherent, necessary. I claim that the critics of Hegel, unfortunately here, Lacan among them, the critics of Hegel are here the ones who how should I put it, are refer to a very primitive pan-logicist, pan-rational image, like Hegel, the idiot who thought he can deduce everything, there is no contingency, and then, but again, it's a very nice question, and I think it's precisely here that one can see Hegel's true greatness. But by how he sees how the totality of mediation, as totality, has to be, with what Lacan calls this point de capiton, quilting point, has the final gesture, the final touch, has to be you complete it through something irrational, through an irrational contingent element. Only such an element can, and for Hegel, for example, exactly the same goes for Christ. Hegel says that that's the difference between Christ and other divinities. Other divinities are wise, whatever. Hegel says Christ is totally a common man, totally contingent. It's an obscenity, Hegel says this, it's an obscenity to praise Christ for his beauty, wisdom. Christ was a dirty, bad-smelling idiot. Any of us could have been Christ. Hegel really here shows already the path towards Kierkegaard, who also likes to say that, and this is true, incidentally, my impression of reading the Bible, like, fuck it, I mean, if you read the Bible, what does Christ say? They're basically banalities. All the point is that he is the Christ who says it. You know what I mean? Kierkegaard says this, who says, if you compare Jesus Christ with an average student of theology today, probably a student of theology can tell it much better. So the whole point is position of authority, but the Hegelian catch, which is purely arbitrary in itself, insignificant. Okay, but whatever, I talk too much. So you and then you. There was one in the back.
Yes.
You, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to point out a difference between, I saw a difference between Buddhism and your thought, and I've read a bit of both. And I think for me, Buddhism is progressive in the sense that once you achieve enlightenment, you sort of mature in unison with your attainment.
Sorry, you saw how much?
Sorry, once you achieve
enlightenment,
you sort of mature in unison with your attainment.
I didn't understand the last words.
Once you achieve this...
No, just the last, yes? You see what?
Once you get your enlightenment, you have to mature further in unison with your attainment. Whereas for you, you first of all empty the beyond of all its positivity.
Yeah.
You then transfer the interiority of the self to this beyond. From then on, you begin your Hegelian retroactive positive presuppositions to infinity. So hence for you, man was always already man. And that is a bit regressive on my view.
This is for me, you know what is wise for me? We should really have talked here more. So strange, because the usual version would have been to say, and this is why I like your critique, precisely the opposite one. It would have been that Hegelians are usually accused of being progressive, you know. You go on, you mediate, you build, and so on. And Buddhists are usually accused of that all that we can do is just like withdraw to the zero. But so again, okay, let's not go too far now, but you know, how to put it, you say maturity and so on. Okay, now I will take you at your word. This is not for me an argument against Buddhism, but it tells something. What shocked me when reading, I mean, some people did something in the best naive Anglo-Saxon way, which I love. They said, okay, Buddhism proposes you prohibit killing, you blah, 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 all that, no, and less suffering. So they said, okay, so let's do something very simple. Let's look at the countries which are predominantly Buddhist, or the king was a Buddhist or whatever. And let's compare their, as far as we can measure it, level of suffering, how many people were killed, blah, blah, with non-Buddhist countries' rulers. The result is exactly the same, if anything, a little bit more cruelty in Buddhist regimes. I mean, this is for me, and this is for me not an argument. If anything, this renders me more sympathetic towards Buddhism. Like, for example, my source, I know he's debated, he's problematic for someone, like the new book that I read now, Zen War Stories by Brian Victoria, where he goes into detail how the Japanese Zen establishment not only passively supported the war, but, how should I put it, theoretically justified it, proposed itself as the Zen way, the Zen and the sword, the Zen way to war, and so on and so on. How you have, how should I put it, for me, and that's for me even, I even find sympathetic this aspect of Buddhism. Why? Because I think the first way to take Buddhism seriously is to totally cut the link between this and this westernized, ecological, humanitarian, whatever. For me, balanced nature against industrial distortion, that's not Buddhism. For a true Buddhist, it doesn't matter if you are in the middle of smoke and shit and pollution. You find it there. I think this is cheating. Any import of this European ecological notion into Buddhism, for me, that's the greatness of Buddhism. That it's not, we are gentle, soft, feminine goddess, or all those things. I mean, this, how Buddhism can also function as this theory of, this overlapping of letting it go, releasement, and extreme discipline, extreme cruelty. Why not? I mean, so you know what I mean here? Or I'll put it in another way. I think that both Buddhism and Hegel have something in common. Nonetheless, when you speak about maturity, but isn't Buddhist maturity also circular? They, my God, often use this wonderful term that in a true becoming, you always become what you are already. And so I just claim that to oppose Buddhism as, how should I put it, as progressive and Hegelian as regressive, well, one would have to develop things a little bit maybe here, no? Because I think that precisely, how should I put it, don't you think that somehow, maybe it's twisted dialectic, but sometimes I tend to say that true progress can only occur if you break out of this Western notion of progress, this is what attracts me in Buddhism and even in people like who definitely was not a Buddhist, rather a disgusting compromiser as a private person, as Brecht. I like people who see that the most stupid criticism of Buddhism for me is the standard Marxist one. Buddhists ontologize suffering into the very foundations of universe. They don't see that suffering is caused by the concrete social circumstances. It's not the very structure of the living, it's concrete. No, I think that it's totally wrong. You can very well combine, how should I call it naively, a global catastrophic vision, suffering pertains to life as such, and concrete engagement. And this is what also attracts me in somebody like Brecht. Brecht's vision is not world is wonderful, men are beautiful, it's just that these social circumstances here are horrible. What I like in Brecht is that he unites a progressive social engagement with a vision of humanity which is in a way extremely misanthropic. People are hell, they are shit. So again, okay, we would have to go further, but you know what I propose? That maybe that additional discussion, additional class that I will try to give, because now we always don't have time, that maybe we should really focus on these elementary questions. Because here I tend to agree with Terry Eagleton. The left today should not have fear to address this, what in old-fashioned terms was called the big metaphysical questions. It's a wrong alternative, either that or concrete action. If we don't do it, then people like Stephen Hawking or the new agers will do it in their way. No? Sorry, you were yeah. Yeah, we will be finishing. Did you say 1 hour or what? No.
So, I mean, about Buddhism, I think the problem at the end, I think you are really reading Buddhism as totally soteriological. You're only reading kind of textual soteriology.
Yeah.
You're reading out what was for the prototype.
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem is that even like your discussion of Buddhism at the level of Dharma or this kind of level, suffering in that kind of level.
Yeah.
It's also especially who I don't believe.
Yeah.
The only one I know.
Yeah.
But you have two kind of like causation. You have a kind of institution causation,
Yeah.
level. And then you have a supernatural foundation, which belongs to daily life. Okay? And the point is that the Tibetans, for example, are extremely concerned constantly. Their life is totally discriminated of danger or problem. And they are always concerned how to solve these changes. And somehow, to an economy of marriage today, when it comes to the economy of fortune, always share life, get to protect
Yeah.
And I think that should we look at the practicality, and this provides some contradiction. For example, the interesting thing is that the fireplace,
Yeah.
if you take the development work in China, they have, on the fireplace, they have two pictures. The picture of Madame Lady and Mao, okay? That is the sacred place of the house that they have Mao. And why? Because Mao somehow incorporates what they call power.
Yeah.
And he said Mao is a great guy. He's a fantastic.
Yeah.
So he has really.
Yeah. No, yeah. You know what I propose? That, okay, I make a promise. What if we do this? I'm ready for this. What if we, since obviously some of you at least are interested in it, maybe we can even try a little bit that next Tuesday I will risk, and what if at the beginning I will prepare some new thoughts on Buddhism, and if some of you have them, but let's all, and this is also meant in a self-critical way, let's all keep it short, so that maybe the first half an hour, any of you, if you want, prepare like, kick me, and this, like when I'm down another, this I like in the movies, when you lie down another kick in the head, you know, this, like, and like prepare your attacks, because now we cannot, no? Prepare your attacks, and because now we cannot do it, but the debate is very interesting, no? I propose, sorry?
Why not speak about spiritual camps Buddhism, for instance?
Sorry, think about?
Spiritual camps that have a Buddhist approach, that they scream out and scream about the monk, which is very much a dialectical thing, not that this passive way of saying, you know, Buddhism is one way or another.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so again, but so I repeat, but then you can make, let's do this at the beginning of Tuesday.
Hello.
Let's give half an hour to this.